History of Mercedes 190. November 1982. Mercedes 190 Introduction. Excitement among the automotive experts on November 29, 1982, the third Mercedes-Benz model series, in the form of the long-awaited compact Mercedes-Benz 190/190e appeared on the automotive world stage. A sensation, as it would turn out, because in terms of design, suspension, engine and lightweight materials, this Mercedes differed distinctively from its brand brethren. In total, Mercedes built 1,879,629 190s, of which 4% 16V models. The introduction of the 190 series was something completely new for Mercedes. It was the first small car for the brand and was therefore called Baby Benz. The introduction of the sporty 16V model brought the brand Mercedes into a market where it had to prove itself as a newcomer. Therefore, Mercedes arranged a record run aimed at proving their reliability. To succeed this record run, Mercedes did extensive testing during the beginning of 1983. Southern Italy, August the 13th to the 21st, 1983. In the early morning of August 13, 1983, under strict supervision of 102 FIA Sport Commissioners, 3 Mercedes 190 E2.316s started out on a 50,000 km high-speed test run, demanding any amount of stamina on the part of cars, drivers and test department staff. According to the regulations, the cars for the record runs were just slightly modified compared to the future production cars. The bodywork was lowered by 15 mm, the front apron was extended downwards by 20 mm, the fan was removed and the power steering was replaced by mechanical steering. The Nardo cars also featured self-leveling suspension on the front axle to keep the ground clearance at a constant level. The gearbox had a longer fifth gear ratio to reach 250 km/h at 6,000 revolutions per minute. Reverse gear was unnecessary and therefore removed. This would have costed 0.4 km/h top speed. The record track in Nardo is precisely 12.64026 km long, has a diameter of some 4 km and slightly banked lanes, hereby permitting driving almost without lateral forces even in the speed range over 240 km/h. According to the engineers' calculations, the cars were to reach the 50,000 km target in the morning of the 8th day, provided there were no problems. The pit stops were performed as scheduled, and the 18 drivers were up to the strain. Lap times were to be 3 minutes and 5 seconds to reach the targeted average speed of 240 km/h including pit stops. Due to the car's low CW value of 0.30, they were expected to reach somewhat higher top speeds than the production versions. Every 2.5 hours, the cars came in for refueling and a change of driver during a 20-second pit stop. The fuel tanks had a capacity of 160 liters instead of the standard 70-liter tank. Fuel consumption during the record run was a slightly over 20 liters per 100 kilometers. The heavily strained rear tires had to be replaced every 8,500 kilometers, and the front tires every 17,000 kilometers. During these 5-minute tire change breaks, the oil and oil filters were also replaced and the valve clearance was checked. In total, 243 stops were made. The mechanics changed every 14 hours and had to do a pit stop every 50 minutes. To protect the headlamp lenses against soiling and damage during the daytime, they were covered by plastic caps. The radiator mask was fitted with a quick-change insect screen to prevent clogging of the radiator. After 201 hours, 39 minutes and 43 seconds, 2 of the cars had clocked up 50,000 kilometers with an average speed of 247 km/h, and the 192.3-16 achieved 3 world records and 9 international class records. The replacement parts carried on board in compliance with the regulations had not been required. The cars had been running perfectly smoothly despite the extreme strain. The third car was laid up for 3 hours by a broken distributor rotor arm, an item costing just a few cents, which the pit crew were not allowed to replace but had to repair. For enthusiasts, one of the cars that took part in the record run can still be seen in the Mercedes Museum in Stuttgart. September 1983. Official debut of the 190e 2.3-16. Frankfurt, September 1983. The high-performance version of Mercedes-Benz's smallest car debuted at the Frankfurt Auto Show in September 1983, after its reputation had already been established by the Nardo speed record. There was a time when cars were designed out of a passion for motorsports. When product planners were conceiving the 190 class and its top model, the 190e 2.3-16, Mercedes-Benz thought rallying was the best arena to showcase their new model line, named W201, but this plan quickly changed to road racing. This was the first time Mercedes sold a relatively inexpensive car. As a result, Mercedes strongly desired to promote the new model's attributes and showcase its abilities in motorsports. But Audi messed up the plans when they introduced the Quattro 4WD into rallying. This made the RWD Mercedes without standing a chance. In the testing period, journalists called the car the Mercedes 190 Sport, but that name was not valuable enough according to Mercedes. Therefore they gave it the name 2.3-16. The numbers 2.3 to show the engine capacity and 16 for the 4 valves per cylinder. May 12. 1984 Nürburgring race. Nürburgring, May 12, 1984, was a monumental time for the 16 volts. The brand new Nürburgring racetrack in Germany was hosting its first F1 race, and a 190e 2.3 16 volts won the supporting race, which was great for public relations. Well, actually, all the cars were identical 16 volts as driven by many former world champions, so a 16 volts was destined to win, but who's counting? Moss, Lauda, Prost and Hill were all beaten by a young upstart driver named Ayrton Senna. Some of us F1 fans know went on to be a 3-time world champion. When the new Nürburgring Grand Prix circuit opened in May 1984, the inaugural race was a celebrity affair arranged by Mercedes, who had launched their 190e 2.3-16 just months before. It was meant as a light-hearted jape to generate publicity for the new car and track, but not everyone saw it that way. Mercedes provided 20 identical near-road spec 190s for a 12-lap race, and gathered together a strong field of Formula One drivers past, present and future to provide the thrills. 9 of them, Sir Jack Brabham, Phil Hill, John Surtees, Denny Hulme, Niki Lauda, Alan Jones and Keke Rosberg, were former world champions, while another, Sterling Moss, could arguably claim to be the greatest of them all. Of the remainder, Carlos Reutemann, John Watson, Klaus Ludwig, Manfred Schutter, Jacques Lafitte, Udo Schutz, Hans Hermann, Elio De Angelis, Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, all had exemplary records in international racing. For hellraisers like Hunt and Rosberg, the race was a chance to have fun, while Moss, Surtees and Hermann had barely raced for decades. But for the young Senna, a virtual unknown who had made his F1 debut just 2 months before, this was an opportunity to prove himself by beating F1's established stars. And when he did, fending off the attentions of Niki Lauda, Carlos Reutemann, and Keke Rosberg. In The Hard Edge of Genius by Christopher Hilton, John Watson remembers, Ayrton took it very, very seriously. His attitude was that he had to win it. That day was cold and wet and he did a bloody good job. The race was also Senna's first meeting, and first confrontation, with his arch-rival Alain Prost, who recalled in an interview with Nigel Roebuck in 1998, "I was coming from Geneva to Frankfurt on a scheduled flight, and Ayrton was due to land half an hour before, so Gerd Kramer of Mercedes asked me if I would bring him to the track. On the way we chatted, and he was very pleasant. Then we got to the track, and practiced the cars. I was on pole with Ayrton second. After that he didn't talk to me anymore. It seemed funny at the time. Then in the race, I took the lead, and he pushed me off the track after half a lap. So that was a good start. After the race, an elated Senna said of his victory, "Now I know I can do it." Compared to the Production cars, the transmission was adjusted to 4,08:1 instead of standard 3,08:1 so that they reached the top speed of 190 km/h. In comparison, the Nardo car transmission had 2,65:1 to reach top speed at 260 km/h. Furthermore, the cars were 15 mm lower, had thicker strut bars, a roll cage, racing tires, bigger brake calipers, front and middle exhausts were removed too. But the cars kept their electrical seat adjustment. September 1984. Production start. Although the car was presented in September 1983, it lasted a year before the car went officially in production in September 1984. This because it took this time to get the car at the Mercedes quality standard. For homologation, Mercedes needed to sell 5,000 in 1 year, they sold more than 8,000 in 1985. The only two colors that were available were blue black and smoke silver. An interesting fact for 190e16V enthusiasts to know is that the in 1984 produced Mercedes 2.3-16 models are slightly different than the 2.316Vs produced after 1984. You can see some of these differences back on the early press photos. Some of the differences are the windscreen wiper arm on the right instead on the left. The wiper arm includes two small wipers instead of one large one. The lower part of the rear bumper has grooves that later versions don't have. The bonnet is a bit longer and had a higher border. Some mechanical/engine parts were different. The Nardo record cars and the Nürburgring race cars were also these early versions. The very first press photos show also things that were changed before production start. The rims were the same design, but the holes in it are smaller than the production version. The first photos show the seats without leather. The gear knob has no numbers on it. The three center gauges are different. The instrument panel has different clocks. There is no Zebrano wood on the center console. The heart of the 2.3-16 was its engine. Mercedes therefore collaborated with engine building masters Cosworth Technology Limited. They helped to develop the 16-valve cylinder head with mechanical valve lifters. They came up with 185 horsepower from only 2.3 liters displacement. It had a light alloy cylinder head with dual overhead camshafts and 4 valves per cylinder, giving the performance version its name. The engine had a mechanically/electronically controlled gasoline injection system. The 190e 2.3-16 consequently produced 72 bhp and 55 Nm of torque, more than the basic single overhead cam engine with only 2 valves per cylinder. The 2.3 liters engine produced 185 bhp at 6.000 revolutions per minute and 235 Nm at 4.500 revolutions per minute. The rev limiter was set at 7.000 revolutions per minute. Acceleration from 0 to 100 km per hour was 7.5 seconds, and the top speed was 230 km per hour. This engine was called the EK engine and it used 98 Romanian lei. In 1986 a catalytic converter became an option. In that case the engine had 170 bhp. Because unleaded fuel was not available at all places, there was also a so-called roof engine with 177 bhp. This engine was prepared for an easy assembly of a catalytic converter as soon as unleaded fuel was enough available. These both engines run on 95 Romanian lei. The cars destined for the US had a slightly reduced compression ratio, and had 167 bhp at 5,800 revolutions per minute and 220 Nm at 4,750 revolutions per minute. The engine was also fitted with an oil cooler to ensure efficient oil cooling. The engine was combined with a manual 5-speed Getrag gearbox tuned for sporty performance. This was a so-called dog-leg gearbox with first gear left and down from neutral. This meant that the remaining second, third, fourth and fifth gear were in a simple H pattern, allowing fast and easy selection. In contrast to most Mercedes cars, fifth gear was not used as an overdrive but rarely destined to reach the top speed. The gear ratios were 4,08/2,52/1,77/1,26/1,00:1 or 4,40. At first an automatic transmission wasn't available for the 2.3-16, but in 1985 Mercedes offered a 4-speed automatic transmission as an option. An interesting detail was that the Getrag gearbox is the same one as used in the BMW M3 E30. For better traction and more stability, the Mercedes 2.3-16 was standard fitted with a 32% limited slip differential. Contributing to the fantastic driving dynamic was the multi-link rear suspension. It was first released on the 190 series and was instrumental in providing sporty and competitive handling. Furthermore, self-leveling suspension on the rear axle was a standard feature. This allows the rear ride height to remain constant even when the car is fully loaded. Self-leveling suspension on the front and automatic height adjustment became an option in 1985. In that case the car could be set plus 30 mm and minus 15 mm than standard. Another factor in the great handling was the weight distribution of 53/47% between front/rear. 15-inch specially designed alloy wheels were standard and were standard mounted with Pirelli P6 tires. Steering was made more direct with turning of 15,27 instead of 16,66. The bodywork was aerodynamically modified to match the car's high performance. Front and rear aprons extended further down and a small spoiler on the trunk lid generated additional downforce. Because of these additions, the 16V was 10 mm longer and 28 mm wider than the standard 190. These body parts weigh 24 kg extra compared to standard 190 model. The 2.3-16 was 16 mm lower at the front and 12 mm lower at the back. The standard 190 has a CW of 0,33, but wider wheels/tires increase the CW. But with special designed aerodynamically body parts, the CW lowered with 3% until 0,32. The alloy wheels also had a special design for better aerodynamics and better cooling for the brakes. The fuel tank has a 70-litre capacity instead of the 55-litre of the standard Mercedes 190. The car was also equipped with a full spare wheel. The interior of the 16V got standard upgraded with a smaller, leather steering wheel with 39 cm diameter, rev counter, headlight height adjustment, and in the center console 3 gauges for voltage, oil temperature, oil pressure and a stopwatch. At the rear there were 2 individual formed seats and at the front special in height adjustable sports seats. Standard the 2.3-16 was equipped with fabric/leather seats, full leather was optional. September 1988. Introduction 190E 2.5-16. Paris, September 1988. The facelifted 190 compact class was shown at the Paris Motor Show. 6 months after the 1.000.000th car of the W201 series had been produced in Bremen. The facelift model didn't show much differences to the body and interior, most improvements were under the skin. Some things that were improved to the interior were better knee and head room in the rear and better seats. Together with the facelift, the new 190E 2.5-16 was presented, replacing the 2.3-16 version after 4 years. The 2.5-litre engine, developed from its predecessor by increasing the stroke 87,20 instead of 80,25. With the introduction of this engine there were no E-key engines anymore. The new engine had 195 HP in the Catalyst version, an increase of 25 horsepower compared to the 2.3-16 Catalyst version. The torque increased with 15 Nm to 235 Nm. There was also a non-catalyst roof version with 204 bhp, an increase of 27 bhp, but very few of these were sold. The developers would have liked to increase the bore also, but the engine didn't have any reserves to do so. The power increase was mainly gained by providing the power at higher revs. Therefore the power is available approx. 1000 revolutions per minute later compared to the 2.3-16 engine. However, the 2.5-16 is more powerful than the 2.3-16. They didn't accelerate much faster. In contrast with the 2.3-16, the cylinder heads were now produced by Mercedes and not by Cosworth anymore. With the introduction of the limited Evolution 1 model in 1989, there was also a AMG power pack available for the 190e 2.5-16. The contents of this AMG power pack are Thesamy as described at the Evolution 1 section. Non-Evolution 2.5-16 models with power pack are very rare. With the introduction of the facelifted 190, Mercedes also introduced the limited slip with an electronically controlled, hydraulically locking differential which activates automatically when required. The electronic control allows varied amounts of differential lock from the standard 15% right up to 100%. It is not a traction control system, however, and can only maximize traction rather than prevent wheel spin. As an addition to the only two colors that were available for the 2.3-16, glue black and smoke silver, there were two extra colors available for the 2.5-16. These were Almadin red and Astral silver, of which the Astral silver color was replaced by Brilliant silver in 1990. March 1989. Introduction 190e 2.5-16 Evolution. Geneva, March 1989. The fastest version of the in 1988 introduced 190 series was the 190e 2.5-16, but not for long. As a result of further racing developments of the Group A car for the 1989 season, the 190e 2.5-16 Evolution was presented at the Geneva Motor Show in March 1989. The newly developed, high-revving 2.5-litre engine had 195 bhp in its standard form, but was prepared for further tuning. The engine itself differed a lot from the engine from the standard 2.5-16 with different capacity, bore and stroke. The rev limiter was also set higher at 7,250 revolutions per minute compared to the 7,000 revolutions per minute of the previous 16 volts. In order to have a better acceleration, the rear axle ratio was now 3,46 to 1 instead of 3,27 to 1 of the standard 16V models. There was also a 225 bhp AMG power pack available for the Evolution model, which costed 19,000 DM that time. In that case, max power increased to 225 bhp at 7,200 revolutions per minute, max revs at 7,700 revolutions per minute, 240 Nm at 5,500 revolutions per minute. Performance improved with 0 to 100 km per hour in 7.1 seconds and a top speed of 236 km/h. With a view to planned racing applications, the brakes now had a diameter of 300 mm at the front and 278 mm at the rear had been modified. 16-inch wheels with Conti Sport contact tires 225/50/16 were now used and a sport exhaust was fitted. Body alterations included a large rear spoiler. The car was also 19 mm lower than the standard 2.5-16 and had a 14 mm wider track at the front and a 24 mm wider track at the rear. The Evolution I has 23% stiffer springs and shocks than the standard 2.5-16. The suspension is in height adjustable with a switch inside the car. This leads to a CW of 32. Within 3 months exactly 502 of these cars were built, all in blue-black metallic. March 1990. Introduction 190E 2.5 to 16 Evolution 2. Geneva, March 1990. A year later than the Evolution I, also at the Geneva Motor Show, a further development of the Evolution I was shown, the 190E 2.5 to 16 Evolution 2. The Evolution I model reached the max on tuning, lower weight and stiffness. The only possibilities in improving the car were tires, brakes and aerodynamics. Mercedes knew that the looks of the Evolution model was very unusual for Mercedes, but it was pure functional, and developed in the wind tunnel. As an reaction on the presentation to the introduction to the Evolution 2, BMW Research and Development Chief, Wolfgang Rietzel answered, "The laws of aerodynamics must be different between Munich and Stuttgart. If that rear wing works, we will have to rebuild the BMW tunnel." And they did. Again, 502 cars were built. This engine had 235 horsepower and correspondingly improved performance. The engine was a further development of the Evo I engine. The compression was changed, shorter stroke crankshaft, bigger cylinders, other intake and exhaust system and a raised peak RPM. It could now rev up to 7,800 revolutions per minute against 7,250 revolutions per minute of the Evo I. Suspension and brakes were slightly changed, 17-inch wheels were now used, the suspension was 45 mm lower than the standard 16 volts. The suspension has 3 settings that could be chosen with a switch inside the car to lower from 15 to 45 mm. The Brembo brakes have 4 piston caliper discs with the same diameter as the brakes on the Evo I model. The only difference is that the EV brakes are made from a lighter alloy. The body was modified again to reduce wind resistance and increase downforce on the front and rear axle. The Evo 2 was only available in left-hand drive and in a blue-black metallic paint like its predecessor. Out of the 502 number produced, 2 of them were painted in silver. The rumors are that both these cars were sort of test cars used to develop the road version of the Evo 2. Mercedes-Benz kept one, so as AMG. All of them were sold even before the Evo 2 was unveiled at the Geneva Motor Show. In order to underline the exclusivity of each car, a small plate containing the word Evolution was placed on both sides of the front wing. Inside the car, on the shift knob was the number of the car. Numbers were written in the following way, 001 500 up to 500 500. Most Evo 2 models were fitted with the optional comfort package which included a full leather interior, air conditioning, sunroof, etc. Exotics. The Mercedes 190E 16V models were officially sold in a lot of countries around the world. Due to different preferences and legislation between countries, there were also differences between the 16V models around the globe. I try to put as much differences as I know in this overview. If you know more, please share this information with me. US version. The 190E 2.3 to 16 was also sold in the US. However, officially only in 1986 and 1987. These cars had some differences compared to the 2.3 to 16 models sold in Europe. Biggest difference was the engine. US specification cars had a slightly reduced compression ratio and had 167 horsepower at 5,800 revolutions per minute and 220 Nm at 4,750 revolutions per minute. US versions also had a lower red line. This was due to a different fuel pump cut-off relay. Further difference was the lower ratio rear axle which gave higher top speed. The exhaust in the US looks the same as the EU version, but is less free-flowing. So far the engine. There were also interior and exterior differences. As most US versus EU cars, the headlights were different. The headlights had a different shape with the glass of the high/low beam mounted a bit deeper in the headlight unit. The indicator lights in the rear lights were red instead of orange from the side. US versions were standard mounted with a third brake light. In the interior were extra bars mounted in the doors and under the dashboard for extra crash protection. The US models were further fitted with a wood trim on the dashboard and center console. The instruments were of course in miles. Furthermore, there were options like automatic climate control and cruise control available that were not an option in Europe. The 2.3-16 and 2.5-16 were also produced as a right-hand drive car. This meant that the interior is different, of course. Biggest difference, however, was the outlet manifold from the engine. Due to the fact that the steering was at the right side of the car, the steering box was in the way where the outlet manifold from the engine was. Therefore the exhaust manifold was reconstructed. Because the reconstructed manifold did not have an optimal form, people say these manifolds have slightly less power, 4 bhp approximately. Furthermore, the windscreen wipers are mounted on the right instead of the left side, and the UK version had turn indicators on the front wing. In Switzerland, the air intake from the 16V models were made a bit more silent by mounting a plastic cap in front of the air intake. Secondly, there was a small tube mounted in the exhaust manifold for emission testing. Furthermore, the rear spoiler from the Evolution 2 model was not road legal, therefore the Evolution 2 was officially sold with an Evolution rear spoiler. In the meanwhile, however, the Evolution 2 rear spoiler has become legitimate. During the production of the 190E16V, it was mandatory in France to drive with yellow fog lights and high beam to avoid blindation to upcoming traffic. This option was mounted under code 610. Furthermore, there was a standard France package mounted under code 629.